Hey guys, Matt here. So in this video, we're going to talk about Intel versus AMD stock. Now, I know plenty of other YouTubers like Learn to Invest have done, videos like this before, and, better videos than I could ever make. But I want to come at this from a different angle, in that I don't really care that much. Now, this is coming from a shareholder of Intel stock, so if I was all about myself and all for my portfolio and the future of my channel and stuff, I will just parade around Intel is better and AMD sucks. But that is most definitely not the case in my opinion. I think that both of these stocks are good stocks, but for completely different strategies. Now, this video will focus on Intel and AMD stock and not the technology. However, I can't really talk about the stock without going over the companies themselves, at least, briefly. So, unless you've been living under a rock or just aren't really involved in technology, Intel and AMD have been rivals for decades. Now, until very recently, Intel had been known as the processor maker where you will go to buy the best stuff, the highest performing chips. AMD had been known as the cost-effective option. You will go to AMD for a chip or processor that would work, but maybe not as well as Intel, but, you get more bang for your buck. And, until very recently, that was it. Now, the first half of this video is going to be a talking head video, and then I'm going to share my screen. But all that changed with the whole Intel versus AMD last year or so, I think in 2020, when I started getting involved in Intel. You probably already know about Intel's manufacturing problems. Last year, I forget which quarter, Intel delayed their 7nm chips to 2023, which crashed the stock. Now, this wasn't the first time that Intel delayed another project to its customers. And the stock cratered 20%, and that's when I bought in. And meanwhile, AMD had already came out with the 7nm chips, both for desktops and for servers. And at the time, Intel was still on its 14nm chips. The 10nm chips haven't even come out yet. And AMD was already on the 7nm chips. And I think it wasn't that earnings call, but it was the earnings call right after that. Again, I don't remember the quarter. The Q&A section turned into an argument over it. And, it was a bad year for Intel. It was a bad year. It really showed just how bad Intel had gotten with its manufacturing. And from that moment on, AMD has been eating away at Intel's market share, deservingly so. And as an Intel shareholder, I will be the first to admit that all the problems that have happened to Intel before and since is 100% Intel's fault. Intel deserves all of it, and AMD deserves to have the market share that it's taking from Intel. Full stop, 100%. And I will say this, for the next couple of years, AMD's got Intel as far as, gaining up on them. Now, and I'm going to share my screen in a second. Now, Intel is not a static target. Thankfully, Intel has been doing some things since then to try to turn itself around. Let's talk about it. Now, I'm not going to read this. I just want to show you the news because this is relatively old. But Intel, they swapped their CEO. It was very obvious that Bob Swan, their previous CEO, it was very obvious that whatever he was doing was not working. So they replaced the CEO. And as far as I'm concerned, Pat Gelsinger, he seems to be taking charge. He ordered the building of some new fabs, which are basically factories that will produce chips in order to combat AMD on the manufacturing field. Now, just to be clear, AMD does not manufacture its own chips. They use TSMC. However, the problem with that is their production is going to start in 2024. That's a lot. So that means between now and 2024, AMD has got Intel as far as gaining market share. Another thing that Intel has done, and this is very recent. Now, this is probably the big thing, is that Intel, and I find this news very welcome as an Intel shareholder, they finally decided to adopt TSMC to use TSMC for their 3 nanometer chips. And that's supposed to come out in, I think, 2023. Assuming we believe this, 2023. But the problem with that is that it's going to be 2023 before they show something. Meanwhile, AMD's got Intel. And meanwhile, we got AMD continuing to innovate with the Zen 4 chips. We're talking 5 nanometer, which are supposed to drop in late 2022, maybe 2023. Like I said, Intel is not in a great position. However, what has Intel done in response? Intel has been dropping the price of its CPUs. Now, taking a look at the stock, and we're going to start with the analyst estimate. Now, we know that analyst estimates aren't gospel, but analysts are paid to research companies. So it is nice to look at them as a resource, if not the final resource. So we got Intel going from a 5.3 to 4.62. Now, the drop in EPS and the revenue this year is expected, and that's because Intel has sold off their NAND business to, I think, a South Korea chip maker. So revenue is going to come in lower this year. So I understand that. But we got Intel, 5.3 EPS to 4.62 and to 4.57 at the end of next year. And we got, as far as sales growth, negative 6.3%, negative 0.2% next year. Now, we don't know if this is going to happen. Like, Intel is innovating, but that's the estimates. And as far as the growth, now we're talking profit growth. Next year, negative 1%, negative 1.1%. Current year, negative 12%. Next 5 years, 5.4% gain per year. And that's compared to AMD, who's talking 50% growth this year, 15% growth the year after. Again, this is assuming that AMD continues, on its path. And as far as profits, we're talking 68% growth this year, 24% growth next year, and then each year for the next 5 years, 32.3%. If AMD does half of this, they're going to eat away at Intel. They're going to absolutely destroy Intel. Now, it's clear to see that despite Intel's reaction and trying to fix itself, which I support, AMD has got Intel for growth for the next several years. But what about valuation? Now, as far as the valuation measures, and we're going to use Yahoo Finance since it's very easy to look up everything since it's in a nice chart. AMD is trading very richly as far as a forward PE, very richly as far as price to sales, price to book. PEG is looking nice. Now, pristine will be under 1, but 1.44 isn't bad. But for all these others, the stock will be trading richly. Now, if you're into AMD for a growth stock, valuations probably don't matter as much, although they do matter to me. But if you're a growth investor, this is probably not as important to you. Meanwhile, we got Intel, 4 PE of 12.6, PEG ratio. It is higher than AMD due to their stunted growth, but for all these others, yeah, they're looking much better from a valuation perspective as AMD. So you can already see where I'm getting at here. Intel is, as far as if you were interested in value investing or whatnot, Intel is the better value stock in my opinion. As far as market cap, they do have a dominant market cap. However, AMD's market cap is growing, while Intel's market cap is, shrinking, except for last quarter. Now, I do have to point this out. Now, despite AMD's explosive growth compared to Intel, Intel is still, by far, we'll call it the bigger stock as far as capital, as far as revenue, as far as everything goes. Like, we were talking at the end of last year, we were talking $77.8 billion compared to AMD's $9.7 billion. Now, as far as growth, they are exploding. But, Intel is growing substantially by the year. So, despite Intel's flaws, it is a stock that is exploding up exponentially. It is growing. Now, it's probably not going to grow as fast over the next couple of years since it's selling its NAND business and its problems with manufacturing, but Intel is growing. As far as net income, $2.4 billion for AMD, compared to 20.8 billion for Intel. Like, Learn to Invest made a YouTube video, which I'm not going to link, but you can look it up, in which he compared Intel to AMD. And basically, to sum it up, let me see if I remember this correctly. If Intel does nothing but screw up for the rest of its business, and AMD does nothing but continue to hit home runs, it would take AMD about 20 years or so for it to catch up with Intel as far as revenue, as far as market share, and stuff like that. Now, I am not going to sit here and say that Intel is immune for screwing up for 20 years in a row, but I'm also going to say that I don't think Intel is going to let that happen. One last thing to point out before I wrap things up is that Intel does pay a dividend. Now, it's not the biggest dividend in the world, but it's not exactly small. 2.45% as far as dividend yield compared to AMD's non-existent dividend. So that is something to keep in mind if you are choosing between these stocks and dividends are a factor. But the point I'm trying to make is this. Intel and AMD as stocks are both really good. Really good. Really strong. However, you would buy each of these for completely different reasons. Intel would be the strictly value play. It is a bigger stock right now than AMD. And it will continue to be the bigger stock even if it does nothing but screw up. It will continue to be the bigger stock for a while. However, like AMD, it is catching up. It's been catching up like quite a bit. And it is expected to continue catching up over the next several years. I mean, it's kind of funny that the roles are reversed. That, you know, AMD, you will go to AMD for, you know, the best performing processors and Intel for the more cost-effective stocks. I think that's kind of hilarious that the roles have switched. But, I mean, each of these stocks are good, but for completely different purposes. That's the point I'm trying to make. So let me know in the comments which of these stocks you own, if any, and why. But anyways, take care, have a great day, and eat your vegetables.